Subway. It's me, your man MG Marcus Grant, still fully vaccinated, still dodging variants like Neo in the Matrix. Big show for you on this Monday. As always, we are joined by producer Justin and the specialists, a cast of dozens that helps us put on this show, and joined on screen, as always, by my pal Michael F. Florio. Now that we are pretty much through Biomageddon, what is the final tally? How did your leagues shake out this week?
I was so. I had some leagues where I managed to have not that many players on bye, but then I had some others where it was brutal. My benches were better than my starting lineup. Took a few L's this week. Had a couple of low-scoring wins, but overall, just very happy that Week 7 is now in the rearview mirror.
Yeah, I think that's probably the consensus. I was kind of a mixed bag as well. Had some good, had some not so good. Got a win in a league where I was absolutely bargain basement terrible, and somehow survived and pulled out a win. Thank you, Michael Pittman, for your last-minute touchdown. That helped me get over the top in that league. So we can put this one in the rearview mirror. I think we have a couple of 4-team bye weeks left, a bunch of 2-team bye weeks left, but nothing as bad as what we just experienced. So let's all be thankful for that. We got plenty to talk about, though, on the show today. We're going to ask the question, is Khalil Herbert the real deal? We'll give you some post-Biomageddon waiver wire options, because that never stops. And we'll preview Monday night's Saints-Seahawks game as we wrap up the week that was. But first, let's start with some fantasy headlines. And we'll begin in Kansas City, where Patrick Mahomes, sort of late in the ball game on Sunday, ended up leaving with what looked at the time like a concussion. Took a really wicked hit in their blowout loss to Tennessee. Had to be helped off the field by his teammates. He went through the protocol and reportedly passed the protocol afterwards. He said he was fine. That part of the reason he came out of the game, because Chad Henne did finish that game for the Chiefs, part of it was because it was such a blowout and it just didn't make sense to risk him. And it appears that he's going to be good to go next week for Kansas City. But, I mean, Florio, this has been a couple weeks now. I mean, it was not a good day for Mahomes on Sunday. Last week, he ended up putting up a good fantasy number, but as you pointed out, a lot of that happened in the second half. I'm not going to sit here and say that, the sky is falling, but at least are we starting to get a little bit worried about Patrick Mahomes right now?
I'm not. I know he hasn't been the Patrick Mahomes that we drafted as the #1 quarterback, but he's been pretty close to that. He's had a couple of down games, but for the most part, the Chiefs offense has done their job. It's the defense that is letting them down. I was of the mindset that, hey, a poor Chiefs defense leads to more fantasy points for Mahomes and Hill and Kelsey. And I still think Mahomes is a quarterback that you start every week. I still think Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelsey are guys that you start every week. Even the running back, whichever one is healthy right now, it's Darrell Williams. I think he is someone that you could start each week. But, man, yesterday was discouraging. If you had any of those Chiefs, I think you feel like they were also on bye in Week 7. Maybe not Travis Kelsey, but the rest of them. But it's disappointing because it was in such a great matchup, too. The Titans had allowed the most fantasy points to receivers. They were up there for quarterbacks. They didn't take advantage of it. It hurts. It's disappointing. But moving forward, I still think you just start all of them without question.
I think you're probably right. I will say from an actual football perspective, what I see out of the Chiefs is I see an offense that feels like it has to be perfect because the defense is going to give up so many points. And because of that, every now and then you see Mahomes maybe trying to do too much and always trying to play hero ball, because I think he feels like they have to put up 35, 40 points a game in order to win because of their defense. So it has led to, I think, some turnovers. It's led to some sloppy play. But in the end, you're still on average getting about 25 points a game from Patrick Mahomes. So let's just chalk yesterday up as having been a bad day, and we move on. We turn the page to Week 8.
I think a big part of it, Marcus, is we've really never seen Mahomes disappoint before. Like, he's been injured before, and that's about it. Like, he said it himself yesterday after the game. It was like, my first 3 years were like, I think he said flowers and rainbows. And it's like, yeah, you couldn't ask for a better first 3 years. So this is the first real adversity him and the Chiefs have had to face.
Yeah, you're probably right. So we'll see how they bounce back from that. I will say this, just straight up football question: are the Chiefs a playoff team right now? Because I feel like they're probably not.
They don't look it when you watch them, but I'm still at the point where as long as they have Mahomes and Kelsey and Hill, I'll never count them out because they can go on a run and score 40 points like a bunch of games in a row and still get hot. So I'm not counting them out, but they don't look like one.
They definitely don't look like one right now. But again, there's still time for them to kind of regroup and see what happens. You talk about sunshine and rainbows and a dark cloud now. There's definitely a big dark cloud over the Carolina Panthers, at least their quarterback position. Sam Darnold on Sunday got benched in their loss to the New York Giants, and Darnold had another ugly game. It's a 4-game losing streak for the Panthers in which Darnold has thrown 7 interceptions. He's had a couple of fumbles. Now, head coach Matt Rule says that they are going to go back to Darnold. He remains the starting quarterback going forward. But considering how bad this has been, I mean, Robbie Anderson at this point is, I mean, we've talked about this before. He probably is droppable. But now you start to worry about DJ Moore, or do you? I mean, do we have concerns about DJ Moore with the quarterback situation being so in flux in Carolina?
Yeah, I definitely think you have to worry. Sam Darnold's play has just not been good as of late. He had 19, 25, 31 and a half fantasy points, and then the last 3 games, it's 6, 15, and 2.4. And in that stretch, he hasn't been passing the ball well. You talk about all the interceptions. He has just 2 passing touchdowns in his last 3 games. Before that, though, he was doing a lot of it with his legs, which doesn't help DJ Moore. DJ Moore, I was starting to come around as a wide receiver 1 through that first month of the season. I don't think we can value him as a wide receiver 1. I think DJ Moore is kind of who DJ Moore was coming into the year. Like, he's going to have some really big games. He himself is a very talented player, but the offense, the quarterback is going to be very up and down, which means DJ Moore is going to be up and down. I think he is more of a wide receiver 2 that has the ability to finish as a top 5 wide receiver any week, but he also has the ability to just kind of bottom out. Not really his fault because of Darnold and the offense. So wide receiver 2, but wide range of outcomes in my opinion.
He really has become very quarterback dependent, which I guess early on it seemed like the quarterback was going well, so it didn't seem like a big deal. But now that Sam Darnold appears to have turned back into a pumpkin, it's bad news there. And look, I'm sitting here having to admit, as somebody who has waved the flag for Sam Darnold for much of the year, that maybe he's just bad. Like, I think it's okay to admit that maybe he's just not as good as we wanted him to be. By the way, Robbie Anderson, and I don't remember who pointed this out on Twitter. I saw it on Monday morning. His last 2 games, he has 20 targets, which seems great. He's turned it into 6 catches for 25 yards. That's not great.
I don't understand what's going on with him. Can you make it make sense to me, Marcus?
I wish. I wish.
He has more targets than fantasy points in the last month. It doesn't make sense.
I can't figure it out. He does have a touchdown in those last couple of games, but it's been bleak. In fact, if you want to go back one more game, it's 27 targets, which he's turned into 8 catches for, let me do the math, 55 yards. I mean, it's just bad. It's just been bad for Robbie Anderson. Speaking of bad, Zach Wilson and the Jets had another bad day. They had an awful day. It seems like no matter what happens, no matter what changes in New England, they still find a way to just bludgeon the Jets. Like, that part never seems to change. And Mac Jones and the Patriots did it again on Sunday. But Zach Wilson left that game with what looked like a knee injury. Took a low hit, kind of got twisted around, ended up leaving the game. Mike White came in and took over. Does this change anything? I mean, I feel like yes, Zach Wilson is out, Mike White is in. I don't know that I have any better or worse feeling one way or another about the guys around him in that offense.
I don't think it changes a whole lot. I think it makes the receivers a little bit more hard to trust. They spread the ball out evenly yesterday, throwing 6 targets to each. But I think you can't trust the receivers as long as Wilson is out. But you can trust the running backs, at least in my opinion. Mike White yesterday, like you said, Marcus, he wasn't playing great, but he did throw 44% of his passes to running backs. There was 9 targets for Michael Carter, 7 targets for Ty Johnson. They were the Jets' top 2 leading receivers yesterday. I know it sounds pretty bleak, but I think as long as Wilson is out, you could kind of trust Carter as like an RB2. And I think Ty Johnson even becomes like a deeper league flex option if they're going to be seeing targets like this.
So I'm watching this highlight video that we're showing. Actually, it's mostly Zach Wilson interceptions, and there was the one he threw over the middle of the field against the Patriots, and all I could hear in my head was this little kid saying, "Hey, Corey Davis has no hops." If you don't know what I'm talking about, just Google "and Corey Davis has no hops," and I'm sure it will pull it up for you. So that's the Jets. Anyway. That gets us to things that we've learned, the things that we saw on Sunday that have made an impression on us that we think are going to have some sort of fantasy relevance going forward. What did you take away from Sunday's action?
I took away that Brandon Bolden is the new James White, and it was kind of looking like that before week 6, and then he only had one target, and it was Ramondre Stevenson getting the passing down work there for the Patriots running backs, and then yesterday, oddly enough, Stevenson was a healthy scratch, and Bolden just went on to lead the Patriots in targets, catches, and receiving yards. He also scored a receiving touchdown, scoring nearly 20 fantasy points. He's a top 5 running back on the week as of now. This is more of a ceiling game, but Bolden for the last month, outside of that week 6 game, has been giving us like 4+ catches each game. I think he's very similar to James White in the sense that you can rely on him for like 8 to 10 safe fantasy points each week, and then he has the ability to every once in a while score 20 fantasy points like he did this week if he finds the end zone or something like that. So I think Bolden is someone bleak week on the waiver wire, but Bolden is someone that if he was dropped, I'd be going out and trying to add right now.
I feel like Bill Belichick or someone in the Patriots building heard us talking about how we sort of have figured out how the Patriots use their running backs. There's no need to worry about it. And they're like, we'll show you. And then they made Ramondre Stevenson a surprise inactive and then gave Brandon Bolden all this work. Good that you're listening, Bill. We appreciate you listening to the show. So that's fun.
We know he's listening.
Yeah, he's always listening, of course, right? The thing I learned this week is that Khalil Herbert, I don't think, is going anywhere. Had the best day a running back has had on the ground against the Buccaneers all season long. Hit 100 rushing yards. Nobody had more than 67 rushing yards against the Bucs so far this season. The last 3 weeks, he's averaging about 90 rushing yards per game. He has surpassed Damian Williams, I think, on this depth chart. They have found a guy that they feel comfortable with running the football. And I get the sense that Khalil Herbert is still going to have a role in this offense even when David Montgomery comes back. So it's definitely nice. We're always looking for more running back help. It seems that we have found it. And look, Damian Williams wasn't bad. It seemed like he was fitting in nicely, but they seem to have found something with Khalil Herbert, the way they ran the ball very effectively on Sunday. So if you've got Khalil Herbert, hold on to him because I think he's still going to see some touches when David Montgomery comes back. Thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. He has ran really well. Like, this was against the Bucs defense, the hardest defense to run on in the league. He runs for 100 yards, averaging nearly 6 yards per carry. And what really stood out to me, Marcus, was they started to get him more involved in the passing game. He caught all 5 of his targets for 33 yards. I agree with you. I think he is now the RB2, even when David Montgomery is back, that he will have a role. I think you hold on to him. You continue to start him until Montgomery is back at the very least.
Yeah, absolutely you do. By the way, side note, it was reported this morning that Bears head coach Matt Nagy has tested positive for COVID-19. So we'll see what happens with him during the week. Obviously, they don't have a game, obviously, for several days. If he does not coach, then it's expected that Bill Lazor, the offensive coordinator, will be the one to sort of take over a lot of the head coaching duties. But that's a story that we will certainly monitor as the week goes along. We will take a break now, though. We'll come back. We'll look at some of the top performers from Week 7, Buy-Mageddon week, and we'll ask what's going on with the wide receivers there in Cincinnati. We know one of them's good, but what about the other ones? We'll find out on the NFL Fantasy Football Show. It's time for Going Strong, presented by Castrol Edge. Let's take a look at some of the top performers from Week 7. Your QB2 for the week was Joe Burrow. Tua Tagovailoa was your QB3 with 26.5 fantasy points. Mac Jones with his first 300 career passing game. That landed him as QB8 for the week. Dearness Johnson on that huge game on Thursday night gets you 24.8 fantasy points. That's the RB3. Brandon Bolden, who Florio talked about earlier in the show, nearly 20 points is the RB4. Khalil Herbert is the RB5. Jamar Chase, another bananas day, is your wide receiver 2. He did all that and was a wide receiver 2. That says something. A.J. Brown is your wide receiver 4, having his biggest game of the season. C.J. Uzama with a pair of touchdowns is your tight end 1. And Kyle Pitts, the unicorn, comes out yet again. He is the tight end 2 with 23.3 fantasy points. All right, let's go back a little and talk about Jamar Chase. Over 200 receiving yards against that Ravens defense. Right now, the Bengals sitting atop the AFC North, which I don't think anybody would have predicted after 7 games so far this season. But back to Jamar Chase. He's good. We figured that out. Twitter loves joking about the fact that he apparently couldn't see and didn't know what a football was apparently in the preseason, and now he's like the greatest thing that's ever happened to the wide receiver spot. But my question is, what do we do now with T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd? Because they have both really become afterthoughts in that Bengal passing game.
Yeah, if you drafted Jamar Chase, kudos to you. You are getting coming into the year, Marcus. I said you either need you're reaching or you need history. History is happening. He is the greatest rookie wide receiver ever, but it's taken away from the other guys. And something I put out on Twitter, I know you did as well yesterday, Marcus, was like, what happened to T. Higgins, man? 15 targets yesterday. We should be ecstatic for that. But he caught 7 of them for 62 yards. His air yards have been way down this year. He was averaging over 11 per target last year. It's down to 8 this year. And as of the last 3 weeks, it's like 7. It's really down. And we both joke that he is the new Juju Smith-Schuster. I joke that to celebrate National Tight End Day, T. Higgins became a tight end because that's how they're using him. They're not really using him downfield at all. All his targets are near the line of scrimmage. And then for Tyler Boyd, it's been bad. I know Tyler Boyd had a good stretch in the middle of the year, but that was because T. Higgins was out. In the games that T. Higgins has played this year, Boyd is averaging just 5 targets per game, 4 catches, 34 yards, and less than 9 fantasy points per game. So right now, I think T. Higgins is like a wide receiver 3 or flex option with not the highest ceiling in the world. And I think Tyler Boyd is, it pains me to say, Marcus, I think he's droppable at this point.
I mean, yesterday, 4 catches for 39 yards. That's the best game he's had in about a month. I'm looking at this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games with fewer than 40 receiving yards. There's really 2 games of note on the schedule for Tyler Boyd, and the rest of them have been awful. And so, yeah, you're probably right. He could probably go back to the waiver wire at this point. Maybe you're holding on to him in deep leagues, but it's hard to make a case to actually have him in your starting lineup at any point. The other wide receiver that we saw on that board, A.J. Brown, had a really big day. Apparently, he cleared the pipes after having some bad fast food during the week, and apparently he's okay again. So now, after what you saw from him on Sunday, combined with what he did last week too, is he back, or is it just that the Chiefs' defense is really bad?
The Chiefs defense is bad, but A.J. Brown is back. Like, we all know A.J. Brown is a beast. He had a huge second half against the Bills and then built on it with his best game of the year. 8 for 133 in a TD. And he really dominated targets. Julio Jones had 4. Everyone else had 3 or less. A.J. Brown is back. He is a wide receiver 1 that you could trust each week.
I think so, too. This feels like a both things can be true sort of scenario where he can be back and the Chiefs can be bad. Are we worried about Julio Jones now? Because he stayed healthy, so that was a plus, but he was sort of invisible. And I feel like right now it's sort of either or. Like, we haven't had a game where both guys have been huge at the same time. I'd like to believe it's possible, but I don't know, man. This is becoming a head scratcher, and I'm a little bit concerned as somebody who has Julio in a few leagues.
Hey, I'm with you. I had Julio Jones ranked in my top 15 wide receivers coming into the year, so I have him on a bunch of teams just because of how drafts worked out. I'm choosing to take yesterday as a positive. Like, he played the full game. He stayed healthy. We could trust that he is now healthy. The hamstring injury is behind him. I'm worried about the usage, but I think yesterday was just encouraging to see him play the whole game. I kind of think he's a wide receiver 3 right now moving forward, but the upside remains very high. I've had people ask me if they could cut him. I'm saying not yet. I'm still holding him, but I don't think he is a guy that you need to start every single week anymore.
Yeah, didn't really see that one coming. So that leads us to I'm Salty, where we talk about the wide receiver, not the wide receivers, the players in general who just sort of let us down and frustrated us in week 7. So for you, who has you all salty right now?
The entire Chiefs offense, and this is like the first time since Alex Smith that I think we could say that, but it was really disappointing yesterday in what was supposed to be a smash spot for them. Like, the Titans haven't been able to stop anyone. I'm sorry, Justin. It is true. Like, the Bills went off against them last week. It's just every week teams are going off against them, and that was not the case this week at all. Mahomes didn't throw a touchdown. He had multiple giveaways. Their leading receiver was Byron Pringle. Tyreek Hill had less than 50 yards in the air. Travis Kelce still did his thing, but even for Travis Kelce standards, it was a disappointing. Darrell Williams was a huge disappointment, only rushing for 20 yards, added 30 in the passing game. I have a team where I have Mahomes, Hill, and Darrell Williams. I got less than 25 points from them combined. I expected that from Mahomes alone. So it was a big disappointment. I know a lot of teams were on bye last week. The Chiefs kind of were as well. It felt like if you had them, I think you just press the reset button and you move forward. You get week 7 out of your mind as quickly as you can.
Yep, you just flush it. You don't watch the tape and you just move on because yeah, that was pretty awful. All right, so since I talked about Julio Jones, I'm just going to bring it back up. Yeah, I'm a little bit salty that I didn't get much out of Julio Jones in what seemed like a great matchup. I mean, Chiefs and Titans felt like it was set for a ton of fantasy points, and look, it came. If you had A.J. Brown, hey, that was great. If you had Derrick Henry, I mean, he sort of did his thing like he does. Ryan Tannehill had a pretty nice day, but if you're looking for the Chiefs, it didn't happen. If you had Julio Jones, it didn't happen in this ball game. I mean, he had the 2 catches for 38 yards. That's it. We're still looking for the first Julio touchdown of the year. Look, admittedly, he probably should have had it a few weeks ago. It got called back on replay. Boo. But still, it hasn't happened. And like you said, at this point, it's hard to make the case that he is a mandatory start each week because just so far, it just hasn't really happened. Like I said, I had high expectations. We already thought, hey, things were good in Tennessee. Tannehill had been playing well. A.J. Brown had been playing well. You add Julio Jones to the mix, it's only going to get better. It hasn't really gotten better. So, and I'm looking at the schedule. The next 3 weeks, they're at Indianapolis. They are out here in Los Angeles to take on the Rams, and then they've got the Saints. So none of those are particularly inviting on paper. It makes me worried about Julio. Ugh.
Yeah.
All right. That feels like a good place to take another break. We come back. We're going to play a round of Real or Mirage with some guys who played pretty well on Sunday, and whether or not this is the start of something big or if this is just a flash in the pan. That's next on the NFL Fantasy Football Show presented by Subway. So you've heard me say this before. I'm going to say it again. We have a TikTok account. You should check it out, at NFL Fantasy. I'm talking to you, like you specifically. You know, you with the shirt. You should go and follow us on TikTok because we're doing a lot of fun, interesting things there. You can also follow me, at Marcus Grant. I did one about Sam Darnold a couple of weeks ago, and it has aged like milk in a hot car. But that's okay. It was true at the time, and I stand by it. Anyway, that's us on the TikTok. What else we are doing right now is playing a little round of Real or Mirage. I pulled out 5 guys who had pretty good days on Sunday, and what this might mean for them going forward. The first, Tua Tagovailoa, and halfway through the game on Sunday against the Falcons, people were already saying that maybe it's time for Tua to pack his bags, that Tua time is over in Miami, that the Dolphins are on the hunt for a new quarterback. Then he ended up throwing 4 touchdown passes. He had 26.5 fantasy points and very nearly got the Dolphins a win if their defense could have held on and stopped the Falcons at the end. So it's certainly not on Tua. But what we saw out of him on Sunday, Florio, is this the start of good things to come, or was he just playing the Falcons?
I think it's real, Marcus, at least in the sense that he is a quarterback that you could trust in good matchups because he's taken advantage of them 2 weeks in a row, and that is what a quarterback is supposed to do. I always hate when people say, oh, but he had a good matchup. Like, was he supposed to play bad in it? Like, no, this is what he is supposed to do. He's thrown for over 290 yards in 2 straight, multiple passing touchdowns in 2 straight, rushing for over 20 yards in 2 straight, and most importantly, scoring over 21 fantasy points in 2 straight. He's the QB3 on the week right now, and there's a lot of hate for Tua on fantasy Twitter and stuff. I've watched back each of his last 2 games. Yes, he is not perfect, but the hate that he gets it's overblown. He's a young quarterback who has shown signs of flashes, and like maybe next week against the Bills you don't trust him, but the week after that against the Houston Texans, yeah, he is 100% a streaming option that I fully trust right now in good matchups.
I mean, the next couple of weeks, right? You mentioned the Bills. He's got the Texans. Then he's got the Ravens. You probably avoid him there. But after that, he's got the Jets. So that's another opportunity potentially to start Tua Tagovailoa. I came into the year thinking he was a QB2, and so far nothing I've seen has changed my mind on that. And so if you have guys on a bye, if you have quarterback injuries, then I think he is a perfectly viable start. I think for him as an actual football player, he is saddled with the burden of being the guy that the Dolphins took when they could have had Justin Herbert, right? Like from the moment Justin Herbert stepped in, became the starter for the Chargers, and played well, then everybody in and around the Dolphins seemed to say, well, maybe we got the wrong guy, and just sort of discounting the fact that first off, he was coming off of a major hip injury. And on top of it, the Dolphins as a whole are just bad. And I don't think that he's the problem, but I think for fantasy, he's a nice option. Maybe you're not starting him every week, but he's a nice guy to have on your roster to slide in there when you need some help at quarterback. In the division, Mac Jones, as I mentioned earlier, his first career 300-yard passing game, pair of touchdowns, 22.18 fantasy points, and is very slowly looking more comfortable. I'm not going to say that he is a full-on replacement for that other guy that used to play there for a long time. But is he a guy
that guy's all right?
Is he a guy that maybe we can slide in there on occasion as our fantasy quarterback?
I think he's a mirage for now. Like he is starting to look more real though. Yesterday, it's hard to put too much stock in it because it's one game against the Jets, and he went off 307 yards, 2 touchdowns, his first 20-point fantasy game in his career. But what I like, Marcus, is he's thrown multiple passing touchdowns in 3 of his last 4 games. The thing I don't like though, he gets the Chargers next week and the Panthers. Then after that, both games on the road. I don't think he's usable in those 2 weeks, but after that the schedule starts to open up a bit for the Patriots. He gets the Browns, who are a tough defense in real life, but for fantasy purposes give up points to quarterbacks, then the Falcons and the Titans. So what I'm looking for Mac Jones is to show me reasons that I could trust him these next 2 games, and if he does that, then I think there's a stretch there where he becomes like a streamable bye-week replacement, and I'll start to say he's more real then after that.
My only concern is just that everything has been sort of short yardage. There's been a lot of checkdowns. The last couple of weeks, it seems like he's sort of testing the waters a little bit further downfield, but it's still Generally, a lot of safe throws. They're not going to score 47 points or whatever it was every single week because they don't get to play the Jets every single week. So I'm still sort of holding off on Mac Jones. I tend to be a little bit more cautious, especially with rookie quarterbacks. I tend to be a little bit more skeptical. So I kind of want to see more before I'm totally in on Mac Jones. But I will say the signs are positive. He definitely has, I think, progressed as the season has gone along. Which, by the way, can we just get Jacoby Myers a touchdown? Like, how is it?
No.
The Patriots scored almost half 100, and Jacoby Myers still can't get a touchdown. I don't understand. I don't get it.
That poor guy, man. His last touchdown is like, what, 3-4 years ago in college? Like, this poor dude, man. He even had one called back last week. It's like, I
don't understand.
Bad for him.
This poor dude. I mean, I think J.J. Taylor had 2 touchdowns yesterday, and Jacoby Myers couldn't even get one. That's awful. All right, back to Miami. Myles Gaskin, every time it seems like I'm ready to just completely punt on Myles Gaskin, like he does just enough to get me interested again. And that was the case on Sunday. He had four catches, 77 total yards from scrimmage, and a touchdown, 17, almost 18 fantasy points from Myles Gaskin. I don't know. I just can't, Florio. I can't completely buy into this. Maybe you have some reasoning that I don't see, but I just can't really get behind Myles Gaskin.
I can't get behind Myles Gaskin as someone like an RB2 that you could trust each week, but I can get behind him as someone that you should have on your roster as a backup running back. And a lot of people this week, every week I put out a tweet like, who are you dropping? A lot of people said Myles Gaskin, and I didn't fully get it. I was like, maybe last week was the week to drop him, but he just scored nearly 18 fantasy points. Why are we dropping him? His last 3 games, 31.9 fantasy points, 3.4, 17.7. So you get the full range of outcomes there with him. The reason I can't buy into him as like a weekly RB2 that you could trust is because Malcolm Brown was the starter yesterday, or at least he was getting the touches early on in the game. Savon Ahmed got involved as well. So if there's 3 running backs that are getting the work, I don't think you could fully trust him. But I do think he is someone that you should have on your bench that you can get in your starting lineup if you get desperate or if injuries or bye weeks start plaguing your running back position, which they've done all year. So I think there's value in having Gaskin as a backup, not as a starter.
Yeah, I think the hard part for me about trying to figure out when to play him is because I just can't.
There's no rhyme or reason.
There's no rhyme or reason to it, right? Like early on, it looked like he was sort of a do-everything back, and maybe he was going to get a lot of opportunity. Then he went a couple weeks where he was just sort of a pass-catching back, a third-down option. Then yesterday, he ends up running for 67 yards and only has 10 receiving yards. I just don't know what the Dolphins are doing with him. And so you're right, maybe he's worth stashing, but it's just like one of those things where I think every week I would look at him on my bench and be like, I don't know, is this the week? And it just would be frustrating. So I understand why people were like, I'm dropping him, because I think people just want to rid themselves of the headache. I get that. It's so frustrating. I can't do it.
I think a lot of it comes down to like game script as well. Like, is this a game where the Dolphins are going to be trailing and needing to throw? Because if so, then I think you can rely on like 4 or 5 catches out of him. Maybe even like he had 10 a couple weeks ago. I think that was the anomaly. But it's game script, which, as we could tell you, Marcus, is very hard to predict game script.
I mean, look, man, the Rams are supposed to be, getting blown out. They were leading that game well into it. So game script.
Kudos to Dan Campbell, man.
Dude.
Like, I think it was you who tweeted it. Like, more bad teams should play like this. Like, just go all out because it's your only chance of winning.
I mean, look, if you are the Texans, if you're the Jaguars, just say to hell with it, man. We're gonna run trick plays. We're gonna run fake punts. We're just gonna go all out. I mean, I'll say this: the Lions are going to beat some teams at some point. Like, they're not gonna go winless this year because those guys play really, really hard, and they seem to really care about each other, and they seem to care about their coach. And what we saw from them on Sunday against the Rams was a team that looked like, you know what, hey, we haven't won a game, but we're still out here, and we're battling, and we're trying to have some fun doing it. I think there's a lesson in that from other teams. Like, the Texans are bad, and they're just not fun to watch. Like, I don't know. At least be interesting.
I was going to say the Texans should watch that Lions game and learn from it. I understand Davis Mills is your quarterback. Maybe Tyrod he's coming back shortly, and maybe it'll be different. But they were down like 30-something to 5 late in the fourth quarter and punting it. I'm like, you're just waving the white flag here, being like, we can't move the ball against you guys at all. You win. Like, it doesn't give any reason to get excited whatsoever.
No. Not even a little bit. All right, a couple more real or mirages. We talked a little bit about Khalil Herbert. I said he was here to stay. Had the 18 carries for 100 yards, 5 catches for 33 yards. That was on 5 targets. I think we both agree that this feels sort of real. And even if he's not the RB1, that he still has a spot here in this team.
Yeah, he is real. I think he will still have a role when David Montgomery comes back. I was going to say maybe you try to sell high, but I think with Montgomery, you know, his return looming, it'll be hard to do that. Maybe it's worth a try, but if not, just hold on to this guy, I think, moving forward. He's useful until Montgomery comes back, and then after that, he might still have a role here and still be a useful fantasy piece.
I think a thing we've seen from Matt Nagy is that they will still sprinkle in a second running back. I mean, we saw that last year with Tariq Cohen before he got hurt. And even earlier this year, we saw Damian Williams stepping in and still getting some opportunities. So if Herbert really has surpassed Damian Williams on the depth chart, which it looks like he has, then I think he's still going to get some chances once Montgomery's back. Obviously, there will be fewer chances, but there will be chances there nonetheless. All right, last one. CJ Uzama, who on National Tight End Day balled out. 3 catches, 91 yards, 2 touchdowns, 24.1 fantasy points. And this is a couple weeks in a row now that Uzama has been pretty good. So are we starting to buy in? I mean, we talked about there's no more T. Higgins or Tyler Boyd, so maybe this is the Jamar Chase, CJ Uzama show in Cincinnati?
I am buying into CJ Uzama as a high upside tight end 2. He only saw 3 targets yesterday, which isn't great. The volume hasn't been great for him the last month, but it hasn't really mattered. He is over 10 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games and over 20 fantasy points in 2 of his last 4 games. So he's a high upside, low floor type of tight end, but I'm not sure it matters when they're using him as a downfield weapon opposite of Jamar Chase, because the defense is focusing on those 3 receivers, so he gets a little space. He could do stuff like that. He said that if you get tackled by the last defender, you have to do 15 push-ups, and he didn't want to do it in front of the team. He did so twice. I think Uzama is like a high-end tight end 2 that you could get into your lineup in certain weeks.
Yeah, I did hear the push-up thing, and he's like, I do push-ups on my own time. I'm not trying to do them in front of the team. So, hey, look,
I don't blame him.
No, I don't blame him either. If that motivates him to get into the end zone, then certainly us fantasy types will be grateful for that. So thank you, Cincinnati Bengals, for putting in that arbitrary rule that helped us get some more fantasy points. We appreciate it. All right, let's take a quick break here. We'll come back. We will dig into the waiver wire. Just because we're through Buymageddon doesn't mean that you don't need to make up some free agent pickups for the week ahead. So we'll talk about some of those next on the NFL Fantasy Football Show. It's time for Refresh Your Lineup, presented by Subway. Take a look at the Week 8 waiver wire targets. Florio, take us through your list here.
Yeah, Trevor Lawrence, who was playing well before his bye, don't forget, and was dropped because he had the bye week, so don't forget about him. Tua Tagovailoa has just been playing well since returning from the IR. Daniel Jones looked better yesterday, gets a great matchup next week against the Chiefs. Mac Jones, we talked about, like him, his schedule down the road a little bit. Kenneth Gainwell, someone that is going to be in a hot target on the waiver wire this week. Brandon Bolden is the new James White. Kenyon Drake, even though he's on bye next week, Josh Jacobs left early and Drake was more utilized. Boston Scott there with Miles Sanders hurt as well. And then some deeper league options in Samaje Perine and Ty Johnson at the running back position. Moving to some receivers, Rashad Bateman, he was my top ad last week. I know he's on bye next week, but get this guy on your roster. Darius Slayton is still in play if the Giants are banged up in a good matchup next week. Khalil Raymond is just outperforming people's expectations. Russell Gage, Elijah Moore, Alan Lazard, Nico Collins. Those are a little bit deeper options if you're in need of a receiver. And then Evan Ingram, Ricky Seals-Jones, and someone we just talked about, CJ Uzama, rounding out the tight end list. Because who doesn't need tight ends? Even on National Tight End Day, Marcus, we're always in need of streaming tight ends.
I mean, it was National Tight End Day, and like Robert Tonyan had a good game, so that sort of spoke to kind of how that worked out there. By the way, you had Khalil Raymond on that list, and as somebody who has been a big stand for Amon-Ra St. Brown, it was super frustrating. I mean, one, if you're St. Brown, you get to come back and kind of play in your hometown, right, in front of your friends and family, and it's on your birthday, and you get 0 targets. Like, that's hurtful.
It's just wrong. It's just wrong, you know? Like I checked yesterday to make sure he was still playing.
Right.
And they didn't throw him the ball.
Didn't throw him the ball on his birthday in his hometown. Like, that's the worst. But let's talk about some of the guys who were actually playing better. Ricky Seals-Jones, first and foremost, who really has stepped in, I think, very nicely since Logan Thomas went on injured reserve. As long as Thomas isn't there, would you put him among the ranks of tight end ones this year?
I think you have to. Like, RSJ has played all but 1 snap in the last 3 weeks, 100% of the snaps the last 2. He saw 7 targets again this week. And in those 3 games, he scored 9, 16, and 11 fantasy points. Like, that is a safe floor and a pretty good upside for a tight end that you can potentially grab off the waiver wire and get into your starting lineups. The 3 weeks since Thomas has been put on the IR have passed, so he is eligible to return now. You got to keep an eye on that. But if Thomas is out, I think Seals-Jones is a low-end tight end one that you could get in your starting lineup each week.
You talk about the floor, and that's sort of what you're playing for with tight ends off the waiver wire. You just want that consistency. And again, for me, until Washington figures out who their second wide receiver is, because Curtis Samuel continues to battle injury, and De'Ami Brown, I think, is hurt now. He may miss some time as well. I just still see the target opportunity being there for RSJ, and so it's hard to keep him out of the lineup, especially if you are streaming tight ends or just looking for help at the position. Kenyon Drake on that list as well. As you mentioned, he has a bye in week 8. But Josh Jacobs suffered an injury. We'll see how serious that is. Obviously, the Raiders get some time to sort of work that out. But the last couple of weeks, Kenyon Drake has felt like a bigger part of the Raider offense, which is what we thought coming into the year. So is he back to having standalone value, or are we too early to kind of determine that right now?
He's trending in that direction, which is why I think he should be added despite having the bye next week. It gives Josh Jacobs more time to recover, so I'm not anticipating that Drake will be the week 9 starter. That is still a possibility. It could be a severe injury for Josh Jacobs, but even if it's not, Kenyon Drake had 6 touches and 2 touchdowns last week, and then early in the game before Josh Jacobs went out, something that I was keeping an eye on was like they were splitting reps. Like the first 6 running back carries, it was 3 and 3 for each of them. So since the coaching change in Vegas, it does look like Drake is more utilized. It looks like he is the backup running back again, which didn't make sense early on. I mean, they gave this guy a lot of money in the offseason, Marcus. It makes sense that they will utilize him. I would be grabbing him because I think you could get him for kind of cheap with him having the bye next week and just keeping him on my bench and seeing what the usage looks like moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a move if you are if you have a lower waiver priority or if your team is already pretty good and you're just sort of looking for some depth, I think that's the move you make. If you need help right away, obviously Kenyon Drake is not going to be the guy that you want. But it's been nice to see him actually be part of the offense after it just seemed like he was kind of invisible for the last few weeks before that. By the way, Josh Jacobs suffered a chest injury. It does not appear to be serious, but again, we'll have a week or so to kind of figure out how bad it is and what this means for him heading into week 9. Top waiver target in week 8, though, this sort of seems like a no-brainer. I think you and I are of the same mind about who it should be.
Yeah, to me it is Kenneth Gainwell. He scored 14 fantasy points yesterday in Miles Sanders' absence. I know we have to wait on official word for Miles Sanders, but he was carted off, and he looked like he knew it was a kind of serious injury. And what I love is Gainwell saw 8 targets yesterday, and that shows that he will clearly be a big part of the Eagles' passing attack, especially because the Eagles are the king of falling behind in the first 3 quarters and then trying to make a massive comeback in the fourth, which leads to a lot of passing. It's going to lead to a lot of short dump-offs for Kenneth Gainwell. But in this backfield, I also think Boston Scott should be rostered. He played a third of the snaps yesterday. He actually had more carries than Kenneth Gainwell. He had 2 targets himself, and he saw 3 touches inside the 10-yard line to Gainwell's 1. So I think he is the more traditional runner there. I think Gainwell is the upside player. He is the top target, but I don't think Boston Scott is far behind him. He'd probably be my number 2 target on the week at the running back position.
I had said on NFL Fantasy Game Day on Sunday morning, we did a segment on players to break up with, and I was breaking up with Kenneth Gainwell because the previous few weeks have been really bleak, where he wasn't really on the field, he wasn't getting opportunities. And it's amazing how things can change in the blink of an eye. Miles Sanders gets hurt, and suddenly, seeing if I still got Kenny G's number. Like, hey, maybe we can work things out. Maybe he's going to be okay. Also, you mentioned Boston Scott. I was looking to see when they play the Giants because he's a notorious Giants killer. It's still a few weeks away. They're still, I would suspect. I think it's 4 or 5 weeks away. It's week 12, so it's still a ways away. So I would suspect Miles Sanders may be back by that. So we don't get the Boston Scott versus the New York Giants game. That's frustrating. Whatever. If you want more waiver wire talk, you can go check it out. Michael F. Florio writes the column every single week. It's NFL.com/waiver wire. And keep in mind that he pretty much writes this thing on Sunday. So don't yell at him if things change, because a lot can happen between Sunday afternoon and Tuesday evening when you put in your waiver claims. But all the information is there. You should be sure to go check it out whenever you have an opportunity. Time for one last break. We'll come back. We will look at the Monday night matchup, the Saints and the Seahawks, and kind of give you some projections about what we think could happen for that one. That's next on the NFL Fantasy Football Show presented by Subway. We'll wrap up the show with a preview of Monday Night Football. The New Orleans Saints heading to Seattle to take on the Seahawks. And I think on paper this might have seemed like a really good game when they scheduled it. It feels a lot less exciting now that we're about to play it. But let's start with the Saints offense. And do you have a fantasy projection for Jameis Winston against a bad Seahawk defense?
I'm expecting somewhere in the range of around 20, 21 fantasy points. Seahawks defense hasn't been great. We've known that, Marcus. You've dubbed them the Legion of Whom, which I think is an amazing nickname that they have definitely deserved. I mean, Jamal Adams in coverage is a quarterback's best friend, so I'm expecting to see some deep shots today to Callaway. I think if Winston should have a good game in this one, and if he doesn't, then I think you got to start to worry about him a little bit.
I would agree with that. I'm sort of with you. I think about anywhere between 20 to 22 points. Feels realistic for Jameis tonight. He just has been sort of a riddle to try to figure out this year. He's had a couple decent games. He's had some head-scratching games, but everything seems aligned for him to put up some decent numbers. So that's kind of what I'm looking for there. On the flip side, Alex Collins is expected to play. They weren't sure about him during the week, but it looks like he's going to be available for the Seahawks tonight. So bearing that in mind, the Saints' run defense is really pretty good. What do you project for Alex Collins?
I'm thinking he gets around 10 fantasy points, and it's possible he sits in the single digits tonight because there's just a lot to worry about with Collins. I was saying earlier this week I would try to get away from him if possible. He was banged up. He was dealing with a groin injury all week, only got in on practice on Saturday. Rashad Penny is back, so they have a backup there that they can trust a little bit more than DJ Dallas or Travis Homer. And then the Saints' run defense is really tough, like you said, Marcus. So this is a game where I'm not expecting much of a ceiling for Alex Collins. I think it's more of a floor game. If you're starting him, you're just hoping for volume and that maybe he finds the end zone.
Well, I'm going to be a little self-serving because I am starting him in a league against you where I need 11 points from Alex Collins to win. So I'm going to project him for 11 points to satisfy my own selfish desires here. But I think that's going to be hard. I feel like 11 points from Collins tonight against the Saints. Maybe a tall ask. If he can somehow find the end zone, I think that helps, but that just doesn't seem particularly realistic, especially as you mentioned with the groin injury with Rashad Penny there, where things go bad, they can always sort of turn to him. This could be a lower scoring game just because neither one of these offenses really seems to scare me a whole lot, but we'll see about what happens with Alex Collins. All right, last thing. Can you paint me a picture where you would consider using Geno Smith anywhere?
I can, because I had to live through this real life picture. I have a super flex league where my quarterbacks on my roster are Josh Allen and Justin Herbert on bye, and then my third quarterback was Trey Lance. So I had to start Davis Mills because Geno Smith was already rostered. But I think if you're in a situation like that where your two quarterbacks are on bye, and it's very possible you could have Allen and Herbert or Dak or any of those situations, and you're just desperate for a quarterback this week, that I think is the only scenario where I would trust Geno Smith in a tough matchup against the Saints defense.
Yeah, that makes the most sense. The only other way I could say it is if you were just being super contrarian in a daily league or something like that, a daily situation. There's just no real upside to starting Geno Smith against the Saints defense. I know that when he came in a couple weeks ago, he looked good, and if Tyler Lockett doesn't fall down, maybe he ends up leading the Seahawks to a win. But I think, with time to kind of watch film and remember who Geno Smith is, I just don't see him really doing much against the Saints. I think Sean Payton will figure out how to slow him down. So, should be mildly interesting, I guess, tonight. I think it's Seattle, so it's probably gonna be raining. Hopefully it's not as gnarly as what we saw in Santa Clara on Sunday Night Football, but there it is. You have a winner for this one, Saints Seahawks?
I think the Saints pull it out because I'm expecting Winston to play pretty well. I think Alvin Kamara has a pretty big day here for fantasy and a great matchup, so I think the Saints pull it out. And yeah, I mean, hoping that it's a competitive game, hoping that it's a lot better than what like the Texans gave us with their backup quarterback yesterday.
Oof, that was absolutely brutal. Let's not think about that anymore. In fact, it seems like a good place to call this one. That is it. We are done. We appreciate you hanging out with the NFL Fantasy Football Show presented by Subway. You know the drill. Tell two friends to tell two friends. Rate, review, and remember, you never see a headline that says Psychic wins the lottery. Be safe, take care of yourselves, get vaccinated, and we'll see you on Wednesday.